He's stubborn.
Who's hot, who not? Tell me who rock, who sell out in the stores. You tell me who flop, who cop the blue drop, who jewels got blocks, who's mostly Dolce down to the tube top. The same old pimp, Mace, you know ain't nothing changed but my limp. Can't stop till I see my name on the blimp. Guarantee me yourself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very good evening to you all. Welcome back to the Money Time podcast. Today's topic, similar to last month's topic, we're looking at how your father has impacted your relationship with money. We've recently discussed the same topic, but on the Mother's Month. This is the Father's Month because we're celebrating Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all the dads. And before we can proceed, let me quickly introduce myself for those who do not know me. My name is Zweli, and I am not alone. I am with my co-host here, Mrs. Nikki Frelinghouse. Nikki, how are you?
Evening, everyone. I'm great, and happy Father's Day to all the dads to be, and the dads in heaven, and all fatherly figures and uncles.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki, for this topic. I think this one we had already said that we were going to look at it. I think people are already expecting this. It's not gonna be a surprise.
Yes.
I think there's more issues here than on the previous one when I think about it, but we'll see how the podcast unveils itself because there's a lot of things that comes into mind. It shouldn't be a long one, this one, because a lot of issues have been discussed on the last one, and they will probably be similar in a way. But for those who have not watched the previous podcast, let's do a quick recap, Nikki. Nikki, can you maybe tell us about how money coaching and our relationship with our parents are related?
Sure, certainly, Zweli. So psychologists believe that by the age of 7, most of our habits, behaviors, thoughts, and emotions around subjects like money is already formed. And then as we go along, we grow into teenagers, young adults, and we find ourselves in situations when things happen, and we ask ourselves, but why is this happening? Where did it come from? Now, we also, or should I say psychologists also use a concept called transference in psychology. So what this means is that we often take on the thoughts, habits, patterns, emotions from people close to us. And in this case, and relevant to today's podcast, would be our fathers. So in a nutshell, this is why it's relevant to us. There are a lot of viewers on this call who may be blissfully unaware that they have unconsciously or subconsciously taken on some thought patterns around money from their dad or fatherly figures.
Thank you, Nikia. You just mentioned a good or bad patterns. What would a viewer do if they pick up that they have a negative money pattern from their dad or maybe a father figure?
So in our coaching arena, we don't necessarily believe that anything's good or bad. Everything's just a perception, right? So when it comes to so-called perceived negative patterns, the first step is acknowledgement or recognition. It takes a great deal of courage for a person to sit down and reflect and look back at their past and actually say, okay, this particular pattern is something that I perceive to be negative, and the source of the origin of this pattern comes from my dad or a fatherly figure. So once you acknowledge it, the second step in our money coaching process is around forgiveness. Forgiveness is a very powerful tool, and it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I can say personally, in certain instances, I struggle with that as well. So once you've identified, you now need to forgive. Forgiveness comes in many forms, or it can be done in many ways. The first would be if you're courageous enough, and if your dad, uncle, or fatherly figure is still around, is to actually sit down and have a discussion with them around what is it that you've inherited from them, how it's worked out, how it's played out in your life. And now that you've taken on this pattern and you're aware of it, you having this discussion with the person and you forgiving them, because this, your dad, your uncle, this fatherly figure is not aware that they've given you this pattern, right? Because there's two parties involved and you've taken on this pattern. They haven't said to you, for example, Zweli, here, I'm a spender. Take on this pattern as a spender. It's something via the process of transference that you've actually picked up as you've grown up. So one method would be face-to-face, I wouldn't say confronting, but having a discussion with them. In some cultures, it's very difficult for us to approach our elders and have these type of discussions. So if that's the case, then the other way would be just to have a silent discussion, look at the mirror, pretend that you see this person looking back at you from the mirror, and you have a discussion with them. Or you look at their picture and you have this discussion. Then some of you may say, but what happens if my uncle or my dad or fatherly figure is no longer with us? Then I'd say you can still have that verbal sort of discussion looking at their picture, or you could write them a letter. But the whole idea here, Zweli, apart from acknowledging it, is forgiving them, and forgiving them is by first letting it out. What is it we got from you? This is how it made me feel. And then you can move to the forgiveness part, and that can be done in many ways. So that could be making use of things like forgiveness prayers. You could use forgiveness affirmations. One of the common methods we use, learned or taught to us by the Money Coaching Institute, is the Hawaiian forgiveness process of Ho'oponopono. Sorry for the mispronunciation, and I'll give you guys a link to that to take a look at one of the YouTube videos. It's something that you can play on the back end and repeat the prayer as it plays on the back end. So those would be a few ways in which you could look at forgiving your dad, uncle, or fatherly figure for any negative patterns that you may have taken on from them.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. I think when it comes to debt, there is more people that may have to forgive rather than maybe appreciate, because it's either you appreciate the patterns or you regret them. And when we regret, obviously, there's obviously some sort of forgiveness that one has to do. Because when you think...
No, Zweli, continue, and I've got something to add to what you've just said.
Yeah, when you think about our situations, like different situations that one can adopt, one thing that I can think of is if a father is irresponsible, like for example, running away from looking after their child in terms of financially taking care of their little one, that can be a pattern that one can pick up and do the same thing. And it just becomes a cycle that you find that when you ask this person, why are you running away from your responsibility as a father? They'll tell you that, you know what, I grew up with a single mom. I never had the fatherly love. So no, I don't expect anyone to be asking me this question because I've never learned it from anyone. So there are a lot of things that you, as fathers, we do not have to teach our kids, but by acting them out, they're already picking them as things that are okay to be done. Because my father got away with not supporting me financially as a child, I can get away with the same thing. You understand? So yeah, this is something that comes into mind because I know that our show is gonna be very short based on the things that we've already spoken about. But one thing that struck me when I was thinking about this was that when it comes to debts, there's a lot of debts that will have to be forgiven because they don't literally have to sit you down and teach you these things, but you look at it and you end up acting it out the same way he did. And at the end of the day, you look bad, but it's something you picked up from history. So yeah, I don't know if you get those cases as a financial or as a money coach, Nikki.
Zweli, I mean, what you've just said is absolutely brilliant. And this actually summarizes one of the major challenges that I address when working with clients from a money coaching perspective. Yes, it is not uncommon in South Africa for a lot of fathers not to show up for their kids, whether it's emotionally, financially, and a lot of households are households where the household is run by a single mom and the kids are raised by a single mom. And in some cases, it's a situation where some kids grow up not even knowing the identity of their father, or some mothers say to their kids, listen, your father's identity is not even worth knowing. You know, I'm the only parent you have, and my maternal side of the family is the only family that you have. Now, let's break it down, and I apologize in advance if my mind goes all over in terms of this particular topic. I will share with you as viewers all the things that I pick up around this topic. So, Zweli, as you mentioned, a lot of fathers don't show up, be it emotionally or financially, for the kids. And it is true, there are a lot of males out there who grow up in that environment. And you find that as they become young adults or adults, they find themselves in relationships. They find themselves where the partner is having, or they're having a child, and they decide not to stick around. And in many cases, they're not even there for the birth of the child. They don't even give the child their family name. There's no cultural rights or anything that takes place, because in effect, and I apologize if I offend anyone when I say this, they were nothing but a sperm donor and they disappeared. That is it. The mom is left to deliver the child and literally raise the child and be responsible for that child for the rest of their lifetime. There are a few men out there when we work together and we do money coaching, and when they pick that up, because remember, with coaching, I'm just a facilitator, right? If these
Yes.
patterns come up, you need to acknowledge it. As I said earlier on, if it comes up as a perceived negative pattern, you acknowledge it, and clients will acknowledge it. And then I say to them, how are you going to change it? In 99.9% of the cases, then the gentleman will say to me, Nikki, what my dad did was wrong. It was not right. What I'm doing is wrong. It is not right. This is how I'm going to change it. But remember, it had to come from the person who was being coached. All I did as a coach was I facilitated the discussion for the person to be put in a situation to then decide, is what I'm doing right or wrong? You know, I'm mimicking what my father did. And that is how healing takes place. That is how growth takes place. And in many instances, you'll find the gentleman will then go back to their moms, and you'll find that the bond with the mom will become even greater and stronger, because now they further acknowledge everything that the mom has done for them, you know, in terms of raising them as a single mom, and the fact that even though the father decided to opt out, the mom still showed up for this particular person. So that is one of the things that we look at. And to any one of you who is in this situation, whether you're male or female, a female whose partner is not showing up, or if you're a male who has not shown up, you still have a choice, right? You can take everything we've said in this podcast, and if you feel that you'd like to change your patterns, you can change your patterns and do things differently. Or for some of you, you may decide, you know, okay, so now I know I've taken this on from a dad, an uncle, a fatherly figure, and I'm happy with it. And so be it. You know, at the end of the day, we all left with choices. But what you've touched on is something very common, not only to South African culture, but in many countries where this shows up. But remember, gentlemen, you have a choice. And also, as much as this podcast is dedicated to dads, uncles, and fatherly figures, the reverse could be possible as well, where a female could choose to leave her child after delivering, whether it's abandoning or just leave the child with the dad and opt out or run away and say, this is it, I've brought the child into the world, but I am relinquishing all my rights as a mother.
And definitely, I'm sure there are those cases as well. But yeah, I just thought of it and thought maybe it's something that you experience, and I'm glad that you do have some of that experience. And I'm sure a lot of viewers can relate to this, because it's a common problem for a lot of people, where you find that you have learned certain bad patterns from an absent father, and you end up being one, because you just feel that anger just went to a point where you actually now mimic your own father's actions by doing the same thing to your own child. So hopefully the viewers can learn something there, that it's always a choice. And obviously we know that sometimes your background or how you are raised might affect your decision making, but at the end of the day, things like the Money Time podcast are here to obviously make some of these problems to be identified and to be, so that we overcome them. So this means that if you're still struggling with such issues, you really need to see somebody that can assist you with these issues. And if you are serious about it, you can actually overcome it. It's not something that you can say, I've failed. No one can come back from such a situation. We can all rise from such struggles. So yeah, thank you, Nikki, for that. Obviously, we cannot leave out the positive side of things. I know that a lot of dads out there, they do try and educate their children about financial responsibilities, and sometimes they literally sit them down and teach them, but most of them, they act on that by being the providers. They work hard. So the children learn that, okay, you have to wake up, find something to do to earn income and support your family. We also appreciate those types of fatherly figures that are out there teaching their sons, their nieces, their nephews, those lessons. So it's not bad at all, but I know that there is a lot of issues around the negativity, but there is also good positives, and we appreciate those.
For sure, because a lot of dads take the lead in terms of providing for the family, specifically financially. And kids see that, especially young males. So another issue I find when coaching couples is the fact that some men find it very difficult when their partner earns more than them, because they have it in their minds that they've got to be the financial provider. And if the spouse is earning more, that also leads to challenges, and they tend to seek money coaching. But that's a subject for another day. But yes, it is true. Being a provider is something that we get from our dads, but also let's honor our moms here as well, where male kids are raised by a single mom. Their only role model is their mom, who's their financial provider. So that also comes from the mom. And as much as the podcast is for dads, but we've also got to bring that forward and also acknowledge the moms for that.
Yes, no, definitely. There's something that you're touching on that raises something on my head, in my head here. During Father's Day, some of these single moms would say, and I'm not trying to be funny or anything. A person would go and say, "Happy Father's Day" to me, and for me, I feel that maybe we should try and do away with such language, and because what it says is that you play the role of being a dad, which is okay, but you are at the end of the day, you are a mom, and it means that moms are powerful enough to close that gap. So don't say Happy Father's Day to myself, because it simply means that only dads are playing that role better than the moms. I don't know if I'm making sense on that, but let's try and do away with such language, so that the kids knows that, okay, my mom is doing everything that they can to raise me, because of my dad is not around. But if you start saying Happy Father's Day to myself as a mom, you are saying that it's true that dads they're supposed to play this role, and you are agreeing. It's like you're contradicting yourself, because you are a female that is powerful enough to close the gap and be able to raise your kids, but you now want to say you are a dad as well. I don't think that's the language that we should be promoting, but I could be wrong. I could be maybe.
So, I mean, Zweli, you raised something that's very valid, because it speaks to the concept of labeling, right? And maybe a way around this would be to rather have something called Parents' Day, right? So this could be applicable to a mom or a dad or anyone that you identify as a parental figure. And in that way, there's no labels. But also things like Mother's Day, Father's Day, these comes from many, many centuries, and we grow up and we find other holidays like Christmas, New Year's, that type of thing. We can spend hours in discussion actually debating whether we should have things like Christmas Day or New Year's Day.
Yes.
But to your point, I think it speaks more around conditioning and the concept of labeling. And certainly for a person like myself, who was raised by a single mom for most of my lifetime, I mean, Father's Day is a day that no longer has any relevance for me, except just silently acknowledging my dad in heaven and wishing him a happy Father's Day. But for me, Mother's Day is the most important. Or in my case, I'd say, hey, Parents' Day would be perfect, because my mom is both my mom and dad. So I hear what you say, but I think we can put that on park as a discussion for another day. But I'm certain to the viewers out there, it's also now sparked some level of curiosity within their minds in terms of labeling and whether we should have separate days to honor different parents.
Yeah, it's a good thing to think about. But yeah, thank you, Nikki, and it brings us to obviously our last question. You've already touched on that your experience in terms of I think you've already given glimpse to how it's gonna sound, but I was gonna ask you if you have any memories, or is there anything that you can think of that you've probably picked up from your dad, if he has been around your life?
Sure. So I lost my dad when I was 14, so my memories are a bit, I don't have many memories, because you're still growing up at that point in time. But what I can recall about my dad, if viewers recall other podcasts, we speak about a concept called money archetypes in money coaching. And my dad was a typical example of a martyr. And I can definitely say this is where I have taken on a money pattern from my dad around being a martyr archetype. So, a martyr archetype is a person who's not just generous, but overly generous. A martyr is a person who always wants to rescue the situation, specifically financially. And prior to doing money coaching, studying it, and being coached by a money coach myself, I'd often show up as a martyr. Initially, I used to think it was because I'm the oldest of three siblings, and I felt that it was my role as the older sibling to take care of my two younger siblings and my mom. So initially, I thought it was that. But as my awareness grew, I actually realized that the origin of this pattern actually came from my dad, and my dad was very much of a martyr archetype. And once I was able to dissect what was the qualities and characteristics of of the martyr money archetype, I unfortunately had to acknowledge that I was laying this out. And then the choice was left up with me to see how is it that I work from there. Do I continue being that way? Because with the martyr, some people feel resentment where they give and others don't. And it was a tricky situation for me because I give with no expectation and with no resentment. But however, it was putting that financial boundary in place, right? And this is something we discussed in a previous podcast. I had to look at myself, look at the boundaries that I put in place, and I'm quite pleased to say that that archetype of a martyr is not as strong as what it used to be. So that's more a bit of what I'd perceive as a negative money pattern that I've picked up from my dad. In terms of positive money patterns that I've picked up from my dad is that my dad was a business owner, which is something that I am as well. And what I have sort of picked up from him is the ability to be able to manage business finances. So this I thank my dad for. If anyone out there is listening to the podcast and you are a business owner, you will be aware that managing finances is something that's always challenging. There's good and bad times when it comes to businesses. And fortunately, thanks to my dad, I was able to pick up some of his positive patterns in relation to managing business finances. So I honor and I thank my dad for that. Zweli, in terms of yourself, is there anything that you would like to share with us?
Well, definitely. When before the show started, I felt like honestly there's nothing to say. But when as you are talking and I'm trying to think back, I've known my dad almost all my life, but I've not really. So let's say in that whole life, I would say I've spent 20% of my time with him. The rest because he was married with somebody else, and I I was conceived while he was married. And, these are issues that we need to speak about and not be ashamed of, because it's nothing we had control over. And especially once you've forgiven such things and they've been talked through, you are happy to be here and, appreciate life more. So, yeah. But when I think about it, he would come almost every week. He would show up and try and make sure that I've got money to go to school, like my lunch, transport. But he never did the major things like taking me to school, buying me school uniforms. Those things he never did. But now I appreciate that more. The minute we started talking about this, I'm starting to appreciate that more, because it wasn't much, but for me it was more about him taking responsibility and showing up for whatever, whether it was he looked at it as his mistakes or a mess or something that he wanted. But he did come, culturally did not do his obligations, because in our culture, there's certain things that you need to do when you have a child. He never did that. That's why I'm using my mom's surname for one. And Lela is my mom's surname. So he's got a different surname. If he had done something culturally, I would be using his surname, even if he was not married to my mom. So yeah, those are the things that I appreciate. And I cannot really tell if there's anything I've picked up, but there's things that I can say that I do that he did. He was an entrepreneur, straight entrepreneur. He has never worked for anyone. He was into transport business, like taxi. And I saw him growing from it, starting at first. They used to use taxi, the private cars were taxis then. He used to have a Valiant car that he bought and he used to do business with. And he bought more. I think from knowing him with one, I remember him owning three. And then also when the bigger minibus came in, like your E20s, your Toyota, he managed to also buy one. So I saw somebody growing business-wise. And I think also that would be an inspiration that was not clear in my mind, but looking at that, it's something that I took away from him. And I think during his last days, I think maybe the last, let's say five to maybe, or let me say 10 years of his life, there I spent a lot of time, more time with him. We spoke, but we never spoke about financial management and all those things. But we just shared moments, and I just appreciate him wherever he is. I'm not angry at him. I think I've forgiven everything that has happened. That is if it has ever made me angry, because I can't really recall being angry. I would get confused and wonder, but I'm not a person that really gets angry to that point that I had to forgive him. But if there was any forgiving, it means I had done that long ago, because I don't even feel angry. I still miss him. But I do have the same feeling that Mother's Day weighs more than Father's Day to my life. So yeah, I think the experience is the same, Nikki. But yeah, I think I'll just cut it there.
So, Zweli, on behalf of myself and all the viewers listening to the podcast, I'd like to firstly thank you for being vulnerable and open and honest, for actually sharing your story. It takes a great deal of strength and courage, especially on air, to share things that you've gone through in your life. And we appreciate your authenticity. So thank you for this. I certainly have learned a lot from you just listening to you and listening to your relationship with your dad and your journey around healing and forgiveness. And it sure sounds like your dad was a great inspiration for your entrepreneurial journey. So thank you for sharing with us.
Yes. In fact, when we had just now, I just thought, I think my dad was a great man. Leave aside my issues. When I look at my other siblings, that he was like present for them 24/7, I can see that he was a great man. And even the love that we share with my half brother and my half sister, my sisters. In fact, I've got half brothers and sisters. It's a great relationship, and I can only refer to my dad and my stepmom or my mom. Normally, I don't call her stepmom, my mom. That they raised such great people. It means he was a good man, and he taught them very well. Because if I cannot relate to him, but I can relate to him through my brother and my sisters.
Surely sounds like he showed up for you, Zweli, as you said, maybe not in other ways like purchasing school uniform, but he did show up on a weekly basis. He did contribute financially. And as the years went by, you guys formed a stronger relationship. So definitely an inspirational story. And thank you for sharing again.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Yeah, that was my last question, and I guess would have been your last question to me. So yeah, I think we have a choice at the end of the day. These are my last words for the episode. We all have a choice at the end of the day. Especially once you know the whole story, you must make the decision. At the end, the decision lies with you, whether you forgive and do the right thing, or you do not forgive and take the same pattern and apply it to your kids. So it's all about, forgiving and letting go. And I think it should go the same way to even our spouses at that level, because I'm a mother, you either a mother or a father at that level to your partner. Also, let's learn to, communicate and forgive, because if we're still going to paint, there are issues that I don't want to talk about because it's irrelevant, but maybe just touch base on that. If I paint my ex-wife or ex-husband as a bad person to my kids, it will have a bad impact in their
Yes.
relationship. So if we can avoid painting badly, but raise the good things, like if you know that maybe your ex-husband is not able to support the child because of they're no longer working, but you know that they love their children, tell them the positive things. Your dad loves you. He may not be able to support you right now, but eventually he will be able to. Don't say, no, that one is, he doesn't love you, forget about him. Things like that, they really mess up the relationship of the child with their fathers, or the other way around. So let's try and plow positivity within our kids' mind. Those are my last words, Nikki. Thank you very much for another wonderful topic. Happy Father's Day to all the dads, and we're still celebrating even the Mother's Day from the previous month.
So, Zweli, you touch on a very important concept, and that's linked to emotional maturity. It takes a very emotionally mature person to be objective and not speak negatively about another partner. And maybe that is a subject we can explore on another podcast, because there's two things that they don't teach us at school: emotional maturity, or or emotions and how to deal with our emotions. And the other aspect is around finances and money management. And the interesting thing is around our podcast, these are two areas that we focus on quite frequently. So yeah, maybe we can pick up on emotions and emotional management, emotional maturity, or lack thereof as a topic for another podcast. So from my side, in summary, we spoke a lot about either forgiveness or honoring parents. And we often, as kids, tend to idolize our parents and put them on a pedestal. But as we grow older and we reflect back on our childhood, the illusion or the veil of the illusion is often lifted, and we see our parents for who they are. And in many instances, during sessions with clients, we pick up that people incorrectly idolize parents who shouldn't have been idolized. But remember, as a young child, you work on what your resources or what your capability is as a young child. But as you grow older, you actually realize, good or bad, your parents tried and they did as best as what they could for you. And that is something we need to take into account, given whatever resources or knowledge or whatever they had, they did their best for us. And this is something we need to acknowledge, because out there, we are all parents ourselves. And are we not trying to do our best for our kids with what we have? However much or however limited our resources are, we're trying to do our best, right? So I would say, see your parents for who they are. We are all just human. Our parents have tried their utmost best to do for us what they could with their limited resources, experiences, or whatever they have. And all we can do as parents is be mindful or acknowledge and be aware of what we've got or received from our parents, whether it's good or bad. And with that knowledge, look at ourselves as parents and decide, what type of parents do we want to be? Do we want to be a copy, cut, paste version of our own parents to our kids? Or do we want to become a more evolved version of our parents to our kids? So viewers, the choice is yours. And also remember, if this particular podcast has invoked or sparked a great deal of emotion within you around your relationship with your parents, be it your dad, your mom, do speak to a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist for assistance. Once again, I am not a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist. Everything I share on the podcast is my knowledge as a certified money coach, which does have an element of psychology for it. But if you realize around all these mixed emotions, relationships, there is something coming up from a money perspective, then you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Once again, in conclusion, to all the dads in heaven, the dads to be, uncles, fatherly figures, we honor and thank you for all that you have done for us and give to us, and we wish you a happy Father's Month. That's all from me, Zweli. Thanks once again for a very informative podcast. Viewers, take care of yourself, keep safe, keep warm, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Bye from me.
Bye-bye.